It started with a detour. A seemingly innocent one, but aren't they all? Rachel called me at the last minute to say she'd be late getting home. She was stuck in traffic, apparently, because of a car accident on the main highway. Her voice was calm, too calm for someone who always panicked at the mere thought of being late. That was the first red flag. I didn't think much of it at the time. People get delayed, accidents happen. But later, when I turned on the local news, they didn't mention anything about an accident on the highway. Nothing. I laughed it off, convinced I was overthinking things. Still, a voice in my head whispered, "Go check." That whisper grew louder until it became unbearable. I grabbed my keys and drove toward the highway she said she was stuck on. Traffic was flowing smoothly, with not a single flashing light or emergency vehicle in sight. I pulled over at the shoulder, heart pounding, and texted her, "Where are you exactly? Maybe I can come help." She replied after a suspiciously long pause, "No need, I'm almost home." But she wasn't. I stayed parked for what felt like an eternity, watching cars speed by. Rachel didn't come down that highway. That's when my stomach dropped. Was I really doing this? Becoming that guy who doubted his wife? I debated driving back home, chalking it all up to coincidence and bad timing. But something in my gut kept me from turning the key. Instead, I drove to a spot I knew she'd have to pass on her way back, one of those back roads she sometimes took to avoid traffic. And there she was. Her car was parked at the edge of a darkened lot behind an old diner that had closed months ago. There was no reason for her to be there, no traffic, no errands, no accident. Just her car. I killed the engine and sat there in the shadows, watching. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. A few minutes later, another car pulled up. A man got out. Tall, confident, the kind of guy who exuded casual arrogance. Rachel stepped out of her car, and before I could even begin to process what I was seeing, he hugged her. Not the friendly, pat-on-the-back hug you give a coworker or an old friend. This was closer. Intimate. Her head rested on his chest for a moment before she pulled back and laughed at something he said. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. This wasn't traffic. This wasn't an accident. This was something else entirely, and I wasn't ready to find out what. I sat frozen in my car, staring through the windshield at the scene playing out in front of me. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing: Rachel, my wife of 10 years, laughing with another man in a deserted parking lot. The glow from a nearby street lamp cast just enough light for me to make out their faces. They were too close. It wasn't just the physical distance that set off alarms in my head, it was the way they interacted. Rachel had a lightness to her movements, a smile on her face I hadn't seen in months. She brushed her hair back in a way she used to when we were dating, the same little gesture that had once made my heart race. Now, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. The man leaned against her car, arms crossed, his posture casual but confident. He wasn't nervous or looking over his shoulder like someone afraid of being caught. No, he was comfortable, like he belonged there. Rachel reached out and placed a hand on his arm, and they shared another laugh. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white. Every part of me wanted to storm out of the car and demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was the need for more clarity. If I confronted her now, she could easily lie, twist the situation, or deny it outright. So I stayed in the car, watching, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would echo across the empty lot. They talked for a while longer, their voices too low for me to hear. Then, the man leaned in closer, his face just inches from hers. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable. But before anything could happen, Rachel stepped back. She glanced around nervously, and for a split second, her eyes swept over my car. I ducked down instinctively, cursing under my breath. When I looked back up, the man was walking away toward his own car. Rachel stood there for a moment, staring at the ground, before getting back into hers. She didn't drive off right away. Instead, she sat in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her head bowed like she was trying to compose herself. After what felt like an eternity, she finally started the engine and pulled out of the lot. I followed her. Keeping a safe distance, I trailed her car as she took the backroads home. She didn't stop anywhere else or take any unusual turns. By the time she pulled into our driveway, my mind was racing with questions. Who was that man? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? I parked a few blocks away and sat there for a while, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. When I finally walked into the house, Rachel was in the kitchen, pretending like nothing had happened. She greeted me with a smile, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my evening was. It took everything in me to play along, to not let my voice shake or my anger seep through. I mumbled something about work and headed upstairs, leaving her to finish whatever excuse she'd given me for being late. In our bedroom, I paced back and forth, my mind racing. I needed proof. Concrete evidence that couldn't be explained away. If I confronted her now without it, she'd deny everything, and I'd have nothing to show for it. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I watched Rachel closely, noting every detail of her behavior. She was good at hiding it, too good. But there were cracks in her facade. The way she kept her phone glued to her side, how she'd step out of the room to take calls, the sudden influx of late-night work meetings. I started piecing together a timeline, going back through my own memory for signs I might have missed. There were plenty. The nights she'd come home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. The weekends she suddenly needed alone time to run errands. Even the subtle changes in her appearance, new clothes, a fresh haircut, makeup she hadn't worn in years. I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. But now that I had, I wasn't going to let it slide. I bought a small recording device and placed it under the driver's seat in her car. If she was meeting this man again, I needed to know. I also started checking her credit card statements, looking for any suspicious charges. It didn't take long to find them: expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, hotel reservations in the middle of the work week. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. This wasn't just a fling or a moment of weakness. This was deliberate. Planned. A week later, the recording device paid off. Rachel had been out late again, and when I retrieved the device from her car, it confirmed everything I feared. Her voice was clear, even over the hum of the engine, as she told the man, David, his name was David, that she couldn't wait to see him again. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said, her voice soft and full of affection. "I'll figure out a way to make it work." I played the recording over and over, each time feeling the betrayal sink deeper into my chest. Now, there was no denying it. My wife was cheating on me. When I finally decided it was time to confront Rachel, I wanted to be sure I had everything ready. There could be no room for her to wriggle out of this. The recordings, the credit card statements, and even a few photos I managed to take during my surveillance, I had it all laid out. My anger had simmered for days, boiling just under the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. It was a Friday evening, a time when she couldn't claim a sudden work meeting or rush off for some invented errand. I waited until she came home, set her bag on the kitchen counter, and kicked off her shoes like nothing was wrong. The sight of her acting so normal, so unaffected, made my blood pressure spike. "Rachel, sit down. We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. She froze for a moment, her hands still on the counter. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice betraying the first hint of nervousness. "Just sit," I repeated, motioning to the chair at the kitchen table. She hesitated, but eventually did as I asked. I remained standing, towering over her like a prosecutor about to deliver the final argument. I could see her scanning my face, trying to read my expression, and that was when it hit her: this wasn't a casual conversation. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice a little shaky now. "I know," I said simply. "Know what?" She played dumb, of course. "You know what?" "I know about him. David." For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. Then, like clockwork, she shifted into defense mode. "David? Who's David?" she asked, forcing a laugh. "Mike, you're not making any sense." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small recorder. Placing it on the table between us, I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, unmistakable, clear as day. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said on the recording. "I'll figure out a way to make it work." Rachel's hand shot up to cover her mouth, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. I didn't stop there. I opened a folder and slid the credit card statements across the table, each one highlighted with charges she couldn't explain away. The hotel reservations. The expensive dinners. She stared at the papers, then back at me, her lips moving soundlessly. "How long has it been going on?" I asked, my voice low and cold. She didn't answer. "How long?" I repeated, louder this time. Rachel finally looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what you think," she whispered. I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. "Don't insult me, Rachel. I've been watching, listening, and piecing it together for weeks. Don't you dare tell me it's not what I think." She broke down, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed into her hands. But I wasn't moved. Not this time. "It's been a few months," she finally admitted, her voice muffled. "But it didn't mean anything." I laughed bitterly. Didn't mean anything? So the hotel rooms, the late nights, the lies, none of that meant anything? "It was a mistake," she cried, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I don't know what I was thinking. I was stupid, okay? I was stupid." "Stupid?" I shot back. "Stupid is locking your keys in the car. Stupid is forgetting someone's birthday. This is betrayal, Rachel. This is you throwing away everything we built together." She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away like her touch burned me. "Mike, please. I'm sorry. I'll end it. I'll do whatever you want, just don't give up on us." Her words only fueled my anger. "You don't get to decide that now. You decided the moment you started this affair. You decided every single time you lied to my face." "Mike, I love you," she said desperately. "No, you don't," I said flatly. "You love yourself. You love the thrill, the attention, whatever the hell this David gives you. But don't stand there and tell me you love me." She started sobbing again, but I wasn't interested in her tears. I stepped away from the table and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Why him?" I asked, my voice calmer now. "Why David?" She hesitated, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. He made me feel wanted," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Wanted? I've been here this whole time, Rachel. Every single day, I've been here for you, for us. And you're telling me that wasn't enough?" "It's not like that," she said quickly. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand." I shouted. "Make me understand how you could do this to me, to our family." She had no answer, just more tears and empty apologies. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, I spoke again. "I'm done, Rachel. I can't do this anymore." "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm saying it's over," I said, each word like a weight lifted from my chest. "I'm filing for divorce." Her face crumpled as she broke down completely, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with her guilt. Once the confrontation was over, I didn't feel relief. I felt anger, raw and unrelenting. Rachel's tearful apologies, her weak explanations, they did nothing to extinguish the fire raging inside me. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore, it was about taking back control. She had made her choices, and now I was going to make mine. Over the weekend, I moved with precision and purpose. While Rachel stayed upstairs in the guest room, crying and calling her sister, I began plotting my next steps. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed, not after everything she'd put me through. The first step was ensuring I had control of the financial situation. I spent hours combing through our shared accounts, transferring money into an account under my name. I wasn't going to leave myself vulnerable. By Monday morning, I had enough to cover myself for months, while Rachel would soon find herself with very limited funds. Step 2 was gathering more evidence. While I already had the credit card statements and recordings, I wanted a complete picture. I installed tracking software on her phone not because I needed more proof of her affair, but because I wanted to know her next move. If she thought she could keep seeing David in secret, she was in for a rude awakening. The opportunity for my revenge came sooner than I expected. On Tuesday afternoon, Rachel left the house for what she claimed was a long drive to clear her head. She thought I'd bought her excuse, but I knew better. Within minutes, the tracker showed her location. She wasn't heading for solitude. She was heading straight for David's apartment. I followed her, keeping a safe distance. When she pulled into the parking lot of a generic apartment complex, my suspicions were confirmed. I parked a block away, taking a moment to calm myself. Bursting in like a lunatic wouldn't help my cause. This needed to be controlled, deliberate. I waited about 15 minutes before making my move. Then, with a folder of evidence in hand, I walked right up to David's door and knocked. The look on Rachel's face when she opened the door was priceless. She stood there, frozen in place, her mouth slightly open like she couldn't believe I had the audacity to show up. Behind her, David appeared tall, smug, and exactly as insufferable as I'd imagined. "Can we help you?" David asked, his tone dripping with fake politeness. "Help me?" I replied, stepping inside uninvited. "No, but I think I can help you both understand the situation better." Rachel stammered, "Mike, what are you doing here?" I ignored her and walked past her into the living room, tossing the folder onto the coffee table. "This," I said, pointing to the evidence spilling out of the folder, "is everything I've gathered over the past few weeks. Hotel receipts, recordings, even screenshots from your texts. Congratulations, David, you've been screwing a married woman, and I have proof of it all." David's smug demeanor faltered. "Hey, man, I didn't know." "Save it," I interrupted. "I don't care what you knew. What I care about is making sure the both of you face the consequences of your actions." Rachel tried to intervene, her voice frantic. "Mike, please, let's talk about this privately." "Oh, now you want privacy?" I snapped, turning to face her. "You didn't seem to care much about privacy when you were sneaking around behind my back." David took a step forward, his hands raised like he wanted to defuse the situation. "Look, I think we should all just calm down." "Don't," I warned, cutting him off. "You don't get to play the peacemaker here. You're as guilty as she is." Rachel was crying again, pleading with me to leave, but I wasn't done. I reached into the folder and pulled out a letter I drafted the night before. "This is a notification to Rachel's workplace," I said, holding up the paper. "It outlines her inappropriate relationship with you, her co-worker, and includes every piece of evidence I've collected. If either of you tries to mess with me during the divorce proceedings, this letter goes straight to her HR department." David paled, his bravado gone. "You don't have to do that." "Oh, I don't have to," I said, folding the paper and tucking it back into the folder. "But I will if either of you makes this difficult." Rachel collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands, muttering apologies I had no interest in hearing. I left the apartment without looking back. The rush of satisfaction I felt as I walked to my car was undeniable. But it wasn't enough. Over the next few days, I made my plans known to Rachel. I told her I'd already contacted a lawyer and that I wanted a divorce finalized as quickly as possible. I also informed her that she'd be moving out of the house by the end of the month. When she tried to protest, I reminded her of the folder and its contents. "You've already ruined our marriage," I said coldly. "Don't make me ruin your career too." Rachel complied, packing her things and moving into a friend's spare bedroom. As for me, I changed the locks and started the process of rebuilding my life on my terms. It took a week for Rachel to reach out after moving out of the house. I hadn't expected her to contact me so soon or at all. I figured she'd lick her wounds quietly and focus on damage control, but then her name popped up on my phone screen late one evening. For a moment, I debated ignoring it, letting her stew in the silence she deserved. But curiosity, or maybe the need for closure, got the better of me. What? I answered coldly. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, the faint tremble in it. Mike, I need to talk to you, she said finally. We've already talked, I replied. You cheated. I'm filing for divorce. What else is there to say? Please, she said, her voice breaking. I need to see you. Just one last time. Can we meet? Against my better judgment, I agreed. Not because I wanted to give her a chance to explain herself, she'd already done enough damage, but because I wanted to look her in the eye one last time and tell her exactly what I thought of her. We met at a neutral spot, a small park a few miles from the house. It was empty except for a lone jogger in the distance. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench and clutching a thermos in her hands. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes red and swollen, her face pale. I didn't sit down. Instead, I stood a few feet away, arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. Thank you for coming, she began, her voice quiet. Get to the point, Rachel, I said, cutting her off. Why am I here? She winced at my tone but pressed on. I've been doing a lot of thinking since I left, she said. About us. About what I did. And I need you to know how sorry I am. I laughed bitterly. Sorry? That's what you wanted to say? That you're sorry? Yes, she said quickly. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know it wasn't about you. It was never about you, Mike. I shook my head, incredulous. It wasn't about me? You destroyed our marriage, lied to my face for months, and humiliated me. But no, it wasn't about me. That's convenient. I'm serious, she said, her voice desperate. I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But you need to understand, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was lost. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. And David, he made me feel seen. Seen? I repeated, anger bubbling up again. Rachel, I was there every day. I supported you, trusted you, and gave you everything I had. If you felt invisible, that's on you, not me. She looked down, tears streaming down her face. I know, she whispered. I know I ruined everything. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. For a moment, I just stared at her, trying to reconcile this broken, tearful woman with the one who had coldly lied to me night after night. Why now? I asked finally. Why are you telling me this now? You had plenty of chances before. Because I was scared, she admitted. Scared of losing you, scared of facing the truth. And now it's too late. I know that. It is too late, I said firmly. You made your choice, Rachel. And now you have to live with it. She nodded, wiping her face with the sleeve of her coat. I understand, she said softly. I needed to say it. To take responsibility for what I did. And to let you know I'll do whatever you want to make this as painless as possible. Painless? I scoffed. Rachel, there's no such thing. You can't undo the pain you've caused. I know, she said again. But I'll still try. I sighed, my anger starting to give way to exhaustion. If you're serious about that, then don't fight me on the divorce. Don't drag this out. Just sign the papers and let me move on. I will, she promised. Whatever you need, Mike. I'll do it. There was a long silence between us. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the love I'd once had for her, buried beneath the rubble of betrayal. But it was just that, a flicker. It wasn't enough to salvage what we'd lost. I hope you figure yourself out, Rachel, I said finally. I really do. But I can't be part of your journey anymore. She nodded, her shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. I understand, she said quietly. I turned to leave, but she called out to me one last time. Mike? I stopped but didn't turn around. For what it's worth, she said, her voice trembling, I loved you. I still do. I just. I didn't know how to show it. I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak without saying something I'd regret. Instead, I walked away, leaving her sitting on the bench, clutching her thermos like it was the only thing holding her together. The house was eerily quiet the night Rachel signed the divorce papers. She had stayed true to her word, not fighting me on any of the terms. When the courier handed me the envelope, I opened it and stared at the signed documents for a long time. This was it. The end of a decade-long chapter. You'd think I would have felt triumphant or vindicated, but the truth was, I didn't feel much of anything. The anger, the hurt, the sense of betrayal, it was all still there, but muted now, dulled by exhaustion and the weight of everything that had happened. I was numb. The next morning, I took the papers to my lawyer's office. He congratulated me on how smoothly everything had gone, saying it was rare for cases like this to resolve so cleanly. I nodded along, barely listening, and left his office feeling like I'd just closed a door I wasn't ready to open again. Back home, I started the slow process of cleaning up my life. Rachel had taken most of her things when she moved out, but traces of her were still everywhere: the mug she used for her morning coffee, the book she never finished reading on the nightstand, even the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the closet. I boxed up what was left and told her to come get it by the weekend. By Saturday, the house was mine alone, stripped of everything that tied it to her. It felt emptier than I expected, but also lighter, like I could finally start breathing again. The first thing I did was rearrange the furniture. It wasn't much, but it made the space feel less like the home we'd shared and more like something new. I spent the rest of the weekend repainting the walls, taking down old photos, and replacing them with things that felt more like me. But rebuilding wasn't just about the physical space. It was about figuring out who I was outside of the marriage, outside of the betrayal. That meant looking at parts of myself I'd ignored for years: my hobbies, my friendships, even my career. For a long time, I'd put Rachel's needs and our marriage above everything else. Not that I regretted being a supportive husband, but it was clear now that I'd lost pieces of myself along the way. It was time to take them back. I started small, reconnecting with old friends I hadn't seen in years. They welcomed me back with open arms, their loyalty a stark contrast to Rachel's betrayal. Over beers and late-night conversations, I began to feel like myself again, not the husband or the victim, but me. I also threw myself into work. The distraction was welcome, and it didn't hurt that the extra hours helped pad my savings. With Rachel gone, I realized how much of my income had gone toward things that never really mattered to me. For the first time in years, I had the freedom to spend money on things that brought me joy, like finally booking that fishing trip I'd been dreaming about for ages. Therapy, though, was the real game changer. I resisted at first, convinced I didn't need help to get through this. But sitting in that room, talking to someone who didn't judge or offer empty platitudes, was more cathartic than I ever could have imagined. Through therapy, I came to terms with the fact that Rachel's choices weren't a reflection of me. They weren't about my shortcomings or what I did or didn't provide. They were about her, her insecurities, her selfishness, her inability to confront her own issues without dragging me down with her. It wasn't an easy pill to swallow, but it was liberating in a way. For so long, I'd been stuck in a loop of self-blame, wondering what I could have done differently. Therapy helped me see that while no marriage is perfect, her betrayal wasn't something I could have prevented. Months passed, and with each day, the weight of what happened grew lighter. By the time the divorce was finalized, I barely flinched when the court papers arrived. I signed them, sent them back, and marked the date with nothing more than a quiet dinner at home. Rachel tried to reach out a few more times, but I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. She sent me a long email once, full of apologies and explanations I didn't need to hear. I deleted it without reading the whole thing. The hardest part, surprisingly, was explaining everything to my parents. They'd adored Rachel, treated her like the daughter they never had. Telling them the truth about what happened felt like reliving the betrayal all over again. My mother cried, my father shook his head in disbelief, and both of them tried to find reasons to hate her. It's not worth it, I told them. I'm moving on, and I need you to do the same. They respected my wishes, though it took them longer than it took me to let go of their anger. Now, standing in the freshly painted living room of a house that finally felt like mine, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The betrayal still stung when I thought about it too much, but it didn't consume me the way it used to. If anything, I felt grateful, not for the affair or the pain it caused, but for what it taught me. I'd spent years ignoring my own needs, convincing myself that being a good husband meant sacrificing parts of who I was. The divorce forced me to confront that and, in the process, rediscover the things that truly mattered. As I looked out the window, the sun setting behind the trees in the backyard, I allowed myself a small smile. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine now. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.